We're now joined in the studio by Solicitor General Menardo Guevarra. Sir, thank you so much for coming back to Head Start live in the studio. Thank you, thank you.
My pleasure, Karen.
Thank you, as always.
Good morning, everyone.
All right, big story today. President Marcos Jr. said the Philippines will finally disengage from any contact and communication with the ICC after it rejected the country's appeal to suspend the drug war probe. So first of all, what does disengage exactly mean, considering we still have a pending appeal? That's the main appeal.
Karen, today I'm sending a memo for the President to explain to him the status of our appeal with the ICC Appeals Chamber. And I will have to clarify with him that the appeal itself is still pending. It has not been denied, it has not been dismissed, and we are simply awaiting the resolution of that appeal, which we don't know kung kailan talaga darating, no? But in the meantime, as part of that appeal, we requested the ICC Appeals Chamber, in the meantime, to give suspensive effect to the pendency of the appeal. Meaning, we're asking the court, do not proceed with the investigation while the appeal is pending, because the investigation itself is the subject matter of the appeal. Even in our own system, if a decision of a lower court is on appeal, that decision is not executed yet because it's not yet final and subject to the outcome of the appeal. So we're wondering why, in the case of the ICC, they resolved it that way. That's why I was so disappointed with that ruling. So, this resolution of the ICC Appeals Chamber was not notified to us well in advance. It came out in the internet, rather in the website of the ICC ahead of any formal notification to us. So the media picked it up, and of course, it came to the knowledge of the President, and somehow along the transmission of the information, the President might have gotten the impression that it was the appeal itself that was dismissed. So I'm sending him a memo today to clarify that the appeal is still on. At any rate, tama rin naman ang Presidente that wala naman tayong iba nang gagawin except to await for the resolution of that appeal. There's nothing more to be done. However, since the investigation was allowed to proceed, notwithstanding the pendency of the appeal, the government has declared that we have no legal duty to cooperate.
Okay, so first, I think for our audience, let's clarify. Your appeal for a suspensive effect is something like a prayer for a temporary restraining order. That's what it means.
Exactly.
In other words, don't proceed first until we've resolved the main appeal.
Exactly.
Okay,
Karen.
so let's put that there so the audience understands. We all understand that. Can we disengage from the main appeal?
That is a possibility. By disengaging, it could mean many things, and that's what I want to clarify with the President himself. Does that mean that we will stop communicating or submitting any further pleadings in connection with our appeal? Does that mean that if the ICC chamber calls for an oral argument on the appeal, we will not participate anymore? Or does that simply mean no further action, let's just await the ruling on the appeal itself, on the merits? Or alternatively, could that also mean that let's just withdraw the appeal? Anyway, they have already proceeded with the investigation. That is also a possibility.
What would you recommend to the President? Because what's confusing right now is the President has said it's a question of jurisdiction. So are we sending mixed messages to the ICC too when we say there's no jurisdiction and yet we are commenting, we are submitting appeals? It's like recognizing their jurisdiction. What would you recommend?
Karen, let me clarify that our participation in this entire process is not a recognition that we are under the jurisdiction of the ICC still. We are doing this because this is precisely provided within the framework of the Rome Statute, if you wish to contest or challenge the jurisdiction of the court or the admissibility of the case or of the Philippine situation, then this is the process. And that's what we are doing. We are working within the framework of the Rome Statute as a former member state. But that does not mean that we are recognizing the jurisdiction of the ICC. We are observing the procedure to challenge the jurisdiction of the ICC. So, if I am asked by the President, since we have already filed our appeal brief and nothing more remains to be done except to await the judgment of the appeals chamber, then we might as well just wait for it. But in the meantime, we don't have to do anything further. If the ICC prosecutor seeks our assistance in his investigation, official assistance, sorry, you do it on your own.
So you will recommend a denial of any form of assistance at this point?
Well, the President has already said that we will not cooperate, and that's precisely because at this point we have no legal duty to cooperate.
In the main appeal brief, you cited legal errors. Can you share some of those legal errors?
Well, we reiterated but explained more fully why we say that the pretrial chamber erred in ruling that the ICC still has jurisdiction over us. The pretrial chamber declared that the court still has jurisdiction because, according to the Rome Statute, notwithstanding the withdrawal of a member state, the ICC retains jurisdiction over crimes that were committed during the time that the withdrawing member state was still a member. Now, we pointed out something in our appeal brief. That is not exactly correct. The court must retain jurisdiction at the time that its exercise of that jurisdiction is called upon. So it's not enough that the crimes were committed during the time that the withdrawing member state was still a member. It must also be important to note that at the time you will exercise that jurisdiction, that member state was still a member. All right? So in our particular case, the request by the ICC prosecutor to commence his investigation, that triggered the exercise of jurisdiction by the ICC. And when was that? That was already in September of 2021. Our withdrawal had become effective in March of 2019, Karen. So at the time that the exercise of jurisdiction was triggered, we were no longer a member of the ICC, and we have no legal duty anymore to cooperate.
But then isn't the exercise of jurisdiction, doesn't that really cover the period when the crimes were committed? I mean, this is just a discussion on jurisdiction. Because when you think about what the ICC just recently did, they issued a warrant of arrest against Vladimir Putin. It seems they don't care about jurisdiction, really. It doesn't matter if you remember. It doesn't matter when the crimes are committed. They will do what they want to do.
Well, are we talking about the case of Russia, Karen?
Not yet, not yet. Just jurisdiction. The period of when crimes are committed. Isn't that the area of jurisdiction?
Well, the area of jurisdiction is one thing. When you will exercise that jurisdiction is another thing. That's what we're saying in the appeal brief. At the time that you were called upon to exercise that jurisdiction, we were not a member anymore. So that exercise of jurisdiction must concur with the requirement that the offense or the crime, subject matter of the investigation, was committed during the time that the member state was still a member.
Okay, so what you're talking about is the exercise.
Exercise.
That's the difference. The jurisdiction is not a time frame. What you're talking about is exercising.
Exercise.
You believe you still have to be within the ICC for them to exercise that.
Correct.
Okay, you said first that it will have far-reaching consequences for the Philippines if we disengage. Is that was, I mean, when we had the report, is that what you meant? You were reacting to the president's statement?
No, Karen.
Okay.
I said that in connection with the promulgation of the ICC Appeals Chamber's resolution denying our request for suspensive effect. So I reacted to that because the implication of that ruling is pwede nang mag-investigate yung ICC prosecutor anytime now, even if the appeal is still pending. So if the ICC prosecutor begins to investigate, that can lead to so many things. And it could lead even to the issuance of warrants of arrest, etc., etc., and so many other things that the ICC prosecutor can do. So that effectively puts us in the same class as some rogue nations, no, where the rule of law was not really observed or upheld. Kaya parang it puts us in a very humiliating situation, so to speak, that the ICC prosecutor will come in or conduct his investigation anywhere that he wishes, but we're open to all of these kinds of activities that may actually embarrass our country.
All right. With the way the ICC has decided on certain appeals, number one, this government has also asked at first if members of the victims' families should be denied to comment. They declined that, right?
Yes.
Number two is they declined the suspensive request. They will continue with the investigation anyway. So it seems that they are going they're decided. That's the message we're getting. You don't have to be a lawyer to get it,
Yes,
right?
correct.
The ICC is saying, we will do what we want to do. In layman's terms, ang tanong ngayon, what can they really do? What can they do?
You know, let me expound a bit on that
Yeah.
on that point, Karen. Right from the beginning, we got this feeling na parang regardless of what we do, that they will really proceed to do an investigation and indict some individuals, no? From the beginning, right from the beginning, way back in, I guess in 2017, when certain complaints were filed, we never even saw a copy of any of these complaints. We were not given the courtesy of taking a look at the complaints filed before the ICC. Number two, of course, we engage with the ICC for the purpose of dialogue, not submitting to the jurisdiction, but because we wanted to let them know that we're doing something here already in our country. We provided them information, data about the things that we were doing domestically insofar as investigation was concerned. All right, so they disregarded all of those information that they themselves requested. They found them insufficient based on their own standards. Thirdly, even at a very late stage, they allowed the participation of victims. Let me clarify this, Karen. We're not opposing the participation of victims in all of these proceedings. That's their right. Sila yung biktima, allegedly. But what we're saying is, on a procedural note, it's not proper na dito sa appeal stage ay meron pang papasok na victims groups. Kasi doon sa pre-trial chamber, they had no participation. Now, all of a sudden, doon sa last phase, doon sa appeals phase, they will be allowed to participate. So on a procedural ground, we were objecting. After all, the purpose of the appeal process is to expedite the resolution. So with the inclusion of more groups, anonymous groups at that, we expect na magkakaroon ng delay in the resolution of the appeal. So, and the last straw was the denial of our request for suspensive effect. So parang we see a pattern, no, na parang right from the beginning up to the very end, parang there is an intention on the part of the ICC na tuluyan talaga ang Pilipinas. So despite our own efforts to observe yung proper rules and procedures under the Rome Statute, it seems that we're not getting anywhere. But nonetheless, nahandyan na yung appeal. It's ready for decision after the ICC prosecutor submits his response to our appeal brief. And that will come next week. if I'm not mistaken. After that, then it's up to the ICC Appeals Chamber to render a judgment. So we'll just await that.
But can the ICC, number one, investigate without going to the alleged scene of the crime itself? Can they investigate by interviewing victims on Zoom, with lawyers submitting affidavits? Can they proceed without going to the Philippines itself?
Karen, exactly the things that you mentioned, the ICC prosecutor can do that. He need not even come here. He can bring witnesses outside the country so that the witnesses can testify, execute affidavits, or they can do the interviews online, or they can make use of certain non-governmental organizations in the Philippines to do this for them, or they can communicate and ask for certain data from other people who may provide information, even the media. So all of this are possible, and it's not necessary for the ICC to come here because they can conduct it anyway, anyhow, anywhere, anytime.
Yeah, and the second question is, if this goes to trial, can the ICC try a concerned party, in this case, former President Duterte and perhaps several others, even without their participation?
No.
They cannot.
The answer to that is no, because the trial will have to be done at the seat of the ICC at The Hague in the Netherlands. So in the first place, they have to acquire jurisdiction over the person of the person indicted. All right, so let's say it's person X. So that person must be able to, the person of that individual must be brought before the ICC trial chamber at The Hague, but he must first be arrested unless he surrenders voluntarily. All right, so otherwise there could be no trial in absentia. That is not possible.
So we can compare it. This is where we talk about the ICC issuing a warrant of arrest against Vladimir Putin. They clearly conducted the investigation on their own, although globally we know what's been happening in Ukraine and Russia. But let's talk about that in comparison to the possible charges and case that former President Duterte may face. So go ahead.
Well,
they issued a warrant.
When the ICC prosecutor begins his investigation, part of that investigation may involve the issuance of a warrant of arrest. The ICC prosecutor may request the pretrial chamber of the ICC to issue such a warrant, or maybe a summons, no, if a warrant of arrest is not really necessary. But the matter of serving that arrest warrant or the summons will have to be done through local institutions or agencies, because the ICC has no legal, in other words, enforcement unit to effect such service of warrants of arrest or summons, or follow up with government agencies. They will have to rely on the operating agencies of the custodial state. In this case, the Philippines, because that's where the suspects are to be found. So that's the question now. Do you go to the PNP? ICC goes to the PNP and requests the PNP to serve the warrant of arrest on Senator X or anyone else. They will probably do that. So the question is, will this government operating units cooperate with them or support their efforts to acquire jurisdiction over the persons of these persons of interest?
Okay, so Justice Secretary Remulla yesterday, when I interviewed him, said, let's see them walk the talk. How would they arrest Vladimir Putin? To a degree, is he correct?
Correct. So who will effect the arrest of Mr. Putin in Russia? The only possibility there is if he goes to another country which is a member state of the ICC, and it's that member state who may try to effect the arrest on Vladimir Putin. So it's up to them if they're willing to do that. Of course, Russia has made a statement that they will take it really, in a very negative way if some other country would try to arrest their own president.
Okay. Now, the question on everyone's mind is, clearly, there are still no specific individuals named
Yes.
in the ICC probe. I think let's put that out there.
Yes.
It is assumed that it is former President Duterte because it was his drug war, but technically there are no names involved. So the question is, you being the Solicitor General, why are we pouring in government resources, your time, the President being interviewed on this, when hypothetically, if it is the former president, it was his drug war, he's now a civilian, why is the government protecting him and others? What is the business of this government? Not wanting justice for its people, not wanting transparency. Kumbaga, ang lumalabas, ang gobyernong ito, nag-aabala. We are lawyering you, not personally, but the government is now lawyering, not for the country, but for specific individuals who can be, who is one, possibly, if he's included in the case, a civilian. Why is the government defending, protecting people who may be guilty instead of its own interests, which are people who are victims of the drug war? That's the question on everyone's mind. Why are you defending, protecting people who could be guilty?
Karen, I have already explained this point several times before, and I have clarified that...
And it's not personal, it's not you as a lawyer.
Of course.
Not at all.
Right.
It's the post.
Right. And I have repeatedly explained that the Office of the Solicitor General is the counsel of the Republic of the Philippines. We're not lawyering for any particular individual, more so if the individual is charged criminally. All right, so we are defending, in effect, the principle that our domestic, judicial, and legal system is functioning. And for that reason, there is no basis for an international entity like the ICC to impose upon ourselves their own type of investigation, because our own system is working. It may be not to their liking, but that is not a sufficient ground for them to take over the investigation that our own system is already doing. That's our main point. The OSG is protecting the system that we have here in our country, regardless of who may be the individuals who may be charged in the future. We're not looking at that anymore. What we're protecting is our sovereign right to do our own investigation in our own way within the framework of our own legal and judicial system. That's all that we want to project to the ICC. We're not protecting anyone. That's farthest from our mind.
Okay, then SolGen, I mean, this is way before your time. If this was the argument of the Philippines, why did we join the ICC in the first place? This isn't like the United States. The United States did help craft the ICC, but the irony is they never joined the ICC. I'm correct?
Yes,
right?
that's true.
But the irony is the Philippines joined the ICC. This was the time of former President Noynoy Aquino, and no less than President Marcos Jr., when he was a senator, voted on August 23, 2011 to ratify the Rome Statute. Former President Marcos didn't question during the Senate hearings. He didn't express reservations. In other words, if this is the argument today, then why did we join it in the first place, right? By joining the ICC, we as a country, and not personally, we're saying we recognize that you can investigate crimes against humanity. We recognize your power, your authority, your jurisdiction. Why did we do that in the first place if we're saying now our courts are working? And that was under Aquino's time.
Right, right. Well, we joined the ICC because we believe that crimes of that magnitude should really be investigated and prosecuted by a much bigger tribunal than the local tribunals. Imagine the 4 crimes that the ICC can investigate: genocide, war crimes, war of aggression or crimes of aggression, and crimes against humanity. So, the magnitude of these offenses is so much that probably a local court will not be able to independently and efficiently handle such crimes. No? So in our case, we are saying that the war on drugs does not even fall under any of those 4 categories. We do not consider the war on drugs as a crime against humanity because it's a legitimate law enforcement operation. It's called war on drugs. It's not a war on drug users or a war on drug pushers. No, it's a war against the crime itself. We're trying to address that situation. In the course of that campaign, however, many people died. But it's
6,185, I think. That's the PNP numbers.
yes, apparently.
Yes, go ahead. But then it's believed to be more than 10,000, but go on.
Yes. What I'm saying is that operation called war on drugs does not fit the concept of a crime against humanity. Okay, so we're disputing that. And that is very well explained in our own submissions to the ICC pretrial chamber. Well, of course, somehow we mentioned it again in the appeals brief of the Philippine government. But that's our main point. So when this whole investigation about the war on drugs turned to be, from the president's point of view, something like there seems to be some political agenda involved in it, and the ICC seems to be somehow cooperating in that, in one sense. The president thought it proper. Mag-withdraw na lang tayo dyan. Let's just withdraw. Okay, because it's not serving its purpose anymore.
But do you believe the ICC has a political agenda?
It's hard to say. Some people would say na it's rather obvious. So that is a possibility. I cannot really, speculate on what's going on in the minds of the justices of the ICC. So tayo na lang ang mag-judge. Let's judge the ICC by their own actions. As a lawyer, I tend to, give credence and good faith to all that our courts and prosecutors are doing as a lawyer. But I'm not a political leader.
Yeah.
And therefore, my views regarding political motives would be irrelevant. So I leave that to the political leadership.
And I wanted to ask you, I mean, just by speaking to you right now, because I've interviewed you many times on Head Start as Justice Secretary, just to lighten the moment a bit, is it difficult for you? I mean, given that you were Justice Secretary under the time of former President Duterte, where the war on drugs was actually implemented. So I remember all our interviews during that particular time, and you did issue strict statements on, frankly speaking, I remember abuse of enforcers. You said that on Head Start. Yes, there are abuses, and you don't tolerate that. And now you're wearing a different hat.
No, I have always been consistent. When I explained or declared to the public that there were abuses committed during the war on drugs, not only in your program, but even before the UN, Human Rights Council, I made that disclosure. Of course, I knew that it would probably upset some people in the government, but that's a fact. And I had to inform the public of the findings of the Department of Justice during my time. Yun ang nakita namin, so I had to report it. And the President himself also admits that there were abuses during the war on drugs. So what am I doing now? As Solicitor General, I am telling the people that the government is now investigating those very people who we found to have abused the war on drugs. So I'm just saying that to the ICC, we're already doing it. You don't need to come in because we're already doing it. So there's no inconsistency between what I'm saying now as Solicitor General and what I said before as Justice Secretary. They're actually a continuation of each other.
But do you think while our courts are working, do you honestly believe that our courts would be able to, at this point on the war on drugs, frankly, charge a former president or even a sitting senator or anyone in office?
It depends on the evidence because an investigation will have to be done first. All right, and if the evidence shows some complicity on the part of the president, then the appropriate charges will have to be filed in court. So let's leave it at that. It all depends on the evidence. What evidence is there to show actual complicity or direct orders of the president for a law enforcement agent to commit a crime? So did his orders constitute a crime? So that is for the investigation to find out. But of course, we trust that if evidence is sufficient, the courts will not have second thoughts about trying a former president. We have seen that many times before. We had two presidents who were charged in court. So why would a third one be not possible?
Okay. All right. Justice Secretary Remulla said when I asked him, are we sending mixed messages that we don't recognize the jurisdiction and yet we're filing appeals? He said, well, it's really for diplomacy purposes. Do you agree with that?
Well, not really for diplomacy. We have engaged with the ICC, even if we do not recognize its jurisdiction anymore, out of committee, out of committee, being a former member state. In other words, we conducted dialogues with the ICC prosecutor in the hope that he will see the light and would not proceed anymore to conduct his own investigation because he'll be convinced that anyway the Philippine government is doing its own. So that's all that we wanted to show them. And in fact, they requested us to provide them information that would show that we're already dealing with the problem, with the matter. So we, out of committee, we engage with them to continue a dialogue with them. But after submitting all that they have requested, they concluded that, sorry, this is not sufficient. So they ask now the pretrial chamber to commence their formal investigation. But when that happened, our withdrawal had already become effective. So that's what we're pointing out now.
Do you think this affects us in the world of nations, considering President Marcos Jr. has taken the time to sell the Philippines all over the world? We've seen it in his travels. He's welcomed by Western world leaders. We know how the European Union really stands by the ICC. In fact, the last visitor of the EU Human Rights Committee said, we've given up our own sovereignty and our own personal rights in belief of the ICC for something greater, right? That's the whole belief system of the EU, which is quite admirable to a degree. But how does this affect us as a country in the world of nations that we don't want to cooperate with the ICC?
You know, Karen, I think we should view it not only with respect to the Philippines' responsibility as a member of the international community. We should also view it insofar as the ICC itself is concerned. Is the ICC following its own principle of complementarity?
Are they?
Because that's...
Are they?
No. Okay. Insofar as we are concerned, the complementarity principle that underlies the workings of the ICC is not being followed by the ICC itself. That's what we're saying now. So, complementarity means the primary responsibility to investigate and prosecute belongs to the member state. Your role is simply complementary. Only when there is no genuine investigation and prosecution being conducted by the domestic institutions may you come in. But you are coming in despite the fact that we are doing what needs to be done in a genuine manner. So it's you, ICC, who is not following your own principles.
That's a good argument. Another one I'm curious is in terms of alleged biases. There were observations that the ICC actually refuses to investigate countries like the United States, abuses of their soldiers in Afghanistan. I'm just curious, and yet it would concentrate on African countries.
I cannot speculate on the motives of the ICC. Maybe yun lang ang kaya nila.
So, SolGen, naniniwala po ba kayo there's no benefit in the Philippines rejoining the ICC? When the EU parliamentarians came, they were, of course, hoping that the Philippines would rejoin the ICC. Should we rejoin the ICC, SolGen?
Karen, you know, it's a political decision to make. It's not for me to make a recommendation to the President regarding that. But by the way the ICC has been conducting itself, I personally tend to agree with the current president, that it's not really a good time to consider rejoining the ICC. Maybe we need to see some changes, some reforms in the ICC before we consider rejoining the ICC.
Still with the ICC, what's going on right now is the ICC declining the appeal of the Philippines for a suspensive effect first. But then there is still a main appeal right now with the ICC. President Marcos Jr. has said, we will disengage. So, Solicitor General, do you believe that if the President, hypothetically, because you will still send him a clarificatory explanation, right, of the status of the Philippines, or frankly, they could be watching right now. If the President says, SolGen, dinidecline naman nila ng dinidecline, dalawa na eh. Wag na natin ituloy. Wag na talaga, hayaan na lang yung appeal na yan. Hindi tayo magre-respond. Kung ano man ang desisyon nila, we'll leave it alone. What is, just look beyond, look 10 years ahead, when you're out of office, when he's out of office, what could be the effect to the Philippines if we leave it hanging?
No, we will not leave it hanging. We will actually wait for the decision of the appeals chamber. Unless, of course, the order is, let's just withdraw the appeal, because it would appear to us that the ICC had already prejudged, because that's the very thing subject of the appeal. Stop the investigation because we're already doing it. That's the main substance of the appeal. But while that matter is pending, the ICC ordered the investigation to proceed. So isn't that already in a way a prejudgment or a vision of the things to come? So why do we have to bother to wait for that decision? Let's just withdraw it. They have in fact prejudged already our appeal. So that is a scenario that is possible. Although of course we have gone this far, who knows if the justices of the appeals chamber will be enlightened. And so let's leave that possibility open. Let's just wait for it. We don't need to do anything further, as the President correctly stated. But let's wait for that judgment to come.
What will a withdrawal mean for the country?
Withdrawal of the appeal?
Yeah.
Then, in that case...
Because the President might surprise you. Who knows? And say, okay, Solicitor General Guevarra, withdraw na. I'm not saying he should, but I'm just saying, what if? What's the consequence?
All right, the consequence of that is the investigation being now conducted by the prosecutor will proceed even more vigorously, and anything could happen after that. Now, when certain individuals get indicted by the prosecutor, then the lawyers of those individuals indicted will take over. So they will now defend these specific individuals who might be indicted by the prosecutor. The Office of the Solicitor General will not represent those individuals because that's not our mandate. Our mandate is to defend the state, not the individuals who might be criminally charged at some future time. So that's another battle. The battle between the specific individuals indicted against the ICC prosecutor. That's a totally different war.
This is interesting. So when we were off air, we were talking about alleged protection, and you stated, I think maybe as a closing note, that you're not here to protect anyone. This is not a question of protecting specific individuals.
Yes, Karen, I mean that because what I'm defending is the responsibility or the primacy of the state in conducting its own investigation of crimes committed with its own territory. That's the main thing there, regardless who the individuals may be involved in some future prosecution. We do not really care much about that. What we're after is to protect the integrity and independence of our own system, free from the impositions of any international entity like the International Criminal Court.
All right, on that note, before we go, I want to lighten it before we go because this was such a passionate discussion on your end, and I want you to come back. How do you like your new job?
I like it very much. I'm a lawyer, and that's the biggest law firm.
Do you like this better than being Justice Secretary? No administration mentioned, but the job itself.
I like both, except that the work at the OSG is more focused, being a law firm. At the DOJ, you have to deal with many administrative matters like the Bucor, the Bureau of Immigration, the Land Registration Authority, and so a lot more areas to cover.
Yeah.
But the OSG, the work is focused on lawyering, on litigation.
All right. Well, on that note, I want to thank you once again for coming and just taking the time to really explain.
It's always my pleasure.
It's a pleasure, the consequences, what can happen, and the next move. Thank you so much, Solicitor General. That's Solicitor General Menardo Guevarra live on Head Start today.